what were we talking about? Yeah. So I want you to think about this. Think about this in the framework of capital theory and investing theory. I talked to you guys a little while back. Every now and then, if you pay really close attention, and I mentioned that this is kind of like an advanced lesson or whatever. I talk about PP&E a lot as as you guys may have heard me say, as the soul of business. Your capital equipment is what's supposed to allow you to have a margin, right? I want you to think back to the 1800s, where you either were a laborer or you owned equipment. In essence, this is when they say the means of production, right? This is the Marxist idea of the means of production. You either own the means of production or you are the means of production. And so when you see companies like MongoDB or Pfizer without any property, plant, and equipment, or maybe not Pfizer exactly, but any biotech company, very little property, plant, and equipment, and they're making gushers of cash. There's something that has to explain that. Now, in the case of the drug companies, there's some monopoly that's happening due to some law. In that case, the law is, of course, called a patent. And then if you're looking for, say, I think the biggest thing was Coca-Cola. Why isn't Coca? I think to a young Buffett, the biggest question was why? How can Coca-Cola do what they're doing? Right? Coca-Cola has this enormous return on capital. Doesn't cost much to make syrupy concentrate. They don't even make the bottles or do the bottling. That's another company. So they just make the raw syrup and sell you the syrup. Somebody else puts it in cans and adds water and carbonates it. And so Coke just prints cash, and you could replicate all Coke for very little amount of money. And the meme, there used to be the old meme about their secret formula. Well, you can make the Coke that tastes identical to Coke with modern science. Maybe 50 or 100 years ago, there was a secret formula, but today, there's no secret formula. When I was a kid, you used to hear about the secret formula all the time. It was a bit of a legend. Today, people don't really talk about it anymore because they know it's a meme. Because you've tasted other colas that taste the same, right? So, there's no secret formula realistically. But in any event, so if you think about why is Coke allowed to do that, it really gets back to the brand. And Buffett studied that really carefully, as should you. And again, I go back to the chess analogy because it's the only one that feels comfortable for me. As a kid studying chess, I read the book My System, which was thought to be one of the best chess books ever written. But then I read Saruman writing a foreword to it, to a modern edition. I read that relatively recently. The modern edition wasn't available back then. But Yasser Saruman wrote this forward, and he said, when I was reading My System, I disagreed with a lot of it. And I read that, I said, I agree. There's a lot of My System that's kind of outdated. It was written 100 years ago. Chess theory was not as well developed as it is today. The meta of chess has shifted quite a lot, just like any other game. So, and for what it's worth, I do think it's very good to study games in general, and I'll tell you about that when it comes to Renaissance sometime. But in any event, when it comes to chess, Yasser said that the book was really valuable to read because it made me think about chess. And I think that the stuff I'm telling you about, like I said, you may never actually invest in GM or Coke. One is capital light, one is capital heavy, right? Capital intensive or capital non-intensive. And anybody can start a car company. The problem isn't really the brand. There's some people that like, Corvettes, and there's some people that like GMC or whatever it is. But in general, cars are kind of, it's not hard to get demand for a car. It's kind of hard to stay in business with all that capital equipment required. Car plant's billions of dollars. So you can't just start a car company. you can start a software company tomorrow. AWS has a free tier, for crying out loud. You could make your computer a web server if you wanted. But, you can't really do that with a car company. You probably can't even do that with a cola company. But it's a lot cheaper to start a cola company and replicate Coca-Cola. But you're not going to sell very well because the brand that they built over many, many years is very valuable. Now that sounds obvious, right? But it's not so obvious when you look at other companies like Stryker. Do doctors really care what surgical tools they use for hip and knee replacements? A little bit, but not that much. I think that when you look at orthopedic companies, you're going to see that there's something very weird there because there isn't much of a monopoly from a regulatory perspective. It's actually kind of easy to get some of those hip and knee replacements approved. But they just make a fortune for some reason, despite the fact that they have very little capital. When I say capital, I mean capital equipment. I don't mean cash. So where is that extra return coming from? Because you, as a business person, have a choice. Say you got $1 million, whether you inherited it or you follow my cassava advice, either way, you have $1 million. You have a choice. You can go to your bank and buy 6% bonds, okay? You can go to, buy the SPY ETF and you think maybe you'll make 8%. You can buy a small cap ETF, maybe you'll make 12%. But what if you buy a plant? Now, let's look at Walmart. If you said, well, I want to recreate some of Walmart. Well, it doesn't look like a great deal. It's an okay deal because let's say this quarter you make about 4.7 billion, right? We'll multiply that by 4. So for the year, you would make 18.9 billion. And if your property, plant, and equipment costs 117 billion, your return is 16%. So that's higher, right? That is higher technically than any of the alternatives I listed. And it won't be hard to find a publicly traded company that has that same, a much higher return, 20% or 30% or 40%, 50, 100, etc. And the question is, well, why can't I make that money? Well, in the case of Walmart, you probably could open a retailer tomorrow. You probably, if you had $1 million to spend, you probably could open a little retailer. And with enough blood, sweat, tears, and heart and soul, you probably could make 16% a year. And that's 16% every year, mind you. Now we have to look at the capital equipment requirements, but that could be a very good return. Now you get your money back, depending on how much this grew. How long would it take to get your money back? Well, 16 times 7, right, is roughly, 6 or 7 years basically. It's really 6, right? 6.5 years, you got your money back. That's a pretty good deal. Now you don't know, of course, there's lots of risks in starting a business, so you have to discount that cash flow quite a bit. So the numbers may be a little different, but the point is that what I want you to think about, which is kind of one of the most important lessons in business, is that the decision between investing in a security and investing in capital equipment is theoretically fungible. And that's something that very few people appreciate. That's mostly because we get pigeonholed into jobs where that's the viewpoint. I mean, you're sitting on a trading desk. Nobody wants to hear this shit. We're here to trade, right? But I think that if you're sitting at, we actually heard this yesterday. I was actually really impressed from Sanofi. Not Sanofi, actually. The Biogen CEO, who was the CEO of Sanofi. Fungible means the same, interchangeable. You can swap it for something else. It wouldn't make a difference. $100 bills are fungible. Your $100 bill isn't any better than my $100 bill. NFTs are non-fungible. So in any event, I think that is Trump saying something? They get a month extra. So, well, that's the problem is you thought to Buffett and to somebody growing up in the 60s, selling sugar water for $1 that costs 5 cents to make is very bizarre. And, the country got really rich. So that was a Veblen good. Today, we don't look at it as a Veblen good. We look at it as an obesity prescription. And what is a Veblen good has changed. But signaling value will lead you to have this huge increase in capital returns. Better than the stock market. Way better. But how do you get that? It's not easy if you can get it. That's why celebrities do tons of endorsements and stuff like that, because it's sort of like this huge return on nothing. They have this intangible asset, this goodwill. They don't have a piece of property or plant or equipment, but they do have their name. And if they can use their name to endorse a product, it's a way of getting returns on their capital, their social capital. So capital can come in all types of forms, but the traditional way of looking at it, which has obviously changed a little bit, is you basically, again, from the really maybe even before the 1800s, but since the dawn of the corporation, if you don't have property, plant, or equipment, you're not getting a return. You're going to be working the property, the plant, or the equipment for somebody else's return. Again, it's very kind of capitalist, Marxist, socialist ideas of, capital versus labor. This is an eternal battle, according to these economists, that there is a battle between labor, who says you wouldn't have your profit without me, and the capital, who's the owner of the capital, advocating for the capital, saying, well, I can't make my profit without the capital, and I deserve the profit, not you. And the union movement, which is largely dead, but the union movement attempted to preserve the value, which is sometimes called the labor movement for that exact reason, tried to preserve the value of labor. Now, of course, we see more and more automation, labor is less and less necessary, and those intangible assets, like brand, have become more important than capital necessarily. When we talk about the death of manufacturing in America, this is what we're talking about. So probably for a good chunk of equity value out there, we've basically said that the value comes in it being hard to make this kind of thing, it being hard to distribute this kind of thing, it's hard to get a brand and a reputation for these kinds of things. Those are the things that stop you from being able to replicate Salesforce.com. Right? How many CRMs are there out there? Millions. But they, for better or worse, they have the best CRM, and they have the most marketed CRM, and all kinds of other things that enable them to be a $200 billion company with probably $5 or $10 billion of capital equipment. So, I just want you to think about that framework, because it really is a rare one to use. And again, when the Biogen CEO said, well, we spent $3 billion on basic research, not development, but basic research. That means research to develop an IND, which is the first step of testing of development, which is testing a drug in people. We spent $300 million a year for 10 years. It's $3 billion. He said, I could have had 10 or 20 venture funds instead of the basic R&D, which didn't amount to much. So it's a really interesting way to look at it and think about it. And I would always say that, you're better off investing in the S&P 500 for most of these biotechs than trying to do their own R&D. Goodwill is just, basically worthless accounting thing, but to me at least. So in any event, I think that idea that what would have this company been worth if it just took its profits and put it in the S&P 500? Well, for a lot of companies, that was a better deal. And so when people say WACC, weighted average cost of capital, they are trying to, the first lesson I learned in business was maybe 14, or real academic finance, is that the corporation has the WACC hurdle, and it has to come up with projects that have a net return on capital above the WACC. And the problem is that if you can't find projects that have a net return that includes probability of success and stuff like that, If you can't find a net return above the WACC, you should return the capital to shareholders through dividends or buybacks. Now, they didn't even say buybacks back then because they didn't really do them. Today, buybacks are more popular than dividends, as they should be for tax reasons. So that is a funny idea because most management teams will never, ever say that they can't find projects that will return above weighted average cost of capital. Now, the problem is, what if you own the business? And this is the agent principal problem. This is like the first chapter of most business textbooks, where the management gets paid if they say that they, they can, get good returns on invested capital. They don't get paid if they say, well, you don't really need us. I'm just going to give you all the dividends back. Have you ever seen a publicly traded company that is just returning dividends, just doing buybacks, no new projects, they're just sunsetting the business, they're harvesting all the cash they can? Never. No way. I got to keep investing. I got to keep doing other things. I got to figure out how to grow. And that's kind of one of the sins of business today is that it's grow at all costs and grow no matter what. But there's healthy growth and there's destructive growth. I mean, you can grow inorganically. Look at what IonQ is doing, right? IonQ is struggling to grow organically, so they're saying, well, let's use our capital and buy a bunch of other companies. Maybe that'll get us out of our problem. Well, the problem is, unless you're paying really good prices for those companies, it's not going to get you out of your problem. It's arguably going to make it worse. So lots of little lessons here. I think, hopefully you considered some of them and learned something. If not, again, there's more important lessons. But one of the funny things about business is that it's actually very easy to understand. It's very simple. All these principles and thoughts are important and easy, but you do have to go through them. If you skip all of these, you are giving yourself a hard time for no reason. It's not hard to learn kind of the academic corporate finance. What is important to do and why they teach this in MBA is, what do MBA study, right? If you can learn mostly all of business right away, what do MBA study? Well, at Harvard, they study case studies. And I think that's, really important. And you guys sometimes see me doing things that you find perplexing. Sometimes I look at old companies. I spend a lot of time looking at companies that are long gone. You can't trade them, things like that. I look at companies I'm never going to trade. I look at private companies, and you say, well, why is he doing any of this? And the point is, like, if you can get these case studies in your head about what worked and what didn't work, you sometimes will see me like put down people's names and like track down every employee of a company. That's actually how I met my girlfriend, who I'm sure will soon be, well, regardless, we live together, so you get the point. But that's how I met my girlfriend. And like, I just look at like, who was the first 20 people at Google? Who are the first 20 people at Microsoft? I'm going to track down every one of these people. Now, I don't know if Bill Gates is going to return my call, but I think some of these other guys might return my call. And believe it or not, you slowly can put together a little bit of a
autofilled,
a little bit of a network, or even a little bit of a pastiche of kind of what you think has happened. And so you start to get like a vision and a sense for okay, this is how this company made itself a special company, or this is how this company didn't make itself a special company and actually got really lucky, and et cetera, et cetera. The story is always very faceted, multifaceted. And, there's ancillary business benefits to that. Maybe one of these people might invest in your company, or your name gets out there a little bit more, whatever it is. But, in general, you're trying to study these businesses of historic businesses. And that's what Harvard MBA basically is, right? You don't even study any of these formulas or things like that anymore. It's not relevant. So I think that's kind of cool. Like people think of business school or graduate school and they groan. Well, you might groan, but there is a value to studying businesses with smart professors and other people. I think you probably learn in business school. You learn more from the other people and the networking you get from other MBA candidates than you would probably from the professors. So lots of now you don't have all the time in the world either, right? So you can't sit there and study all day, but I try to one of the reasons I like to do this is I like to look at businesses and study them, and I get more knowledge about, okay, how did this company do this in this situation? And I'm able to, in my own businesses, recall some of this stuff and say, oh yeah, this is how Atlassian took over the world. This is how AppLovin rose to success and then maybe fell from success. And when maybe you're in your company and you're thinking about doing a move like AppLovin did, maybe it's even unethical. You say, does this make sense? Should I do this? And we don't know how the AppLovin story will end. We have no clue. May end well, and not so well. But it's a new story. It's a new case study. And do you know when the case studies stop? Anybody know? When all the case studies stop? Yep, when you die. Thank you, Carol. And that's why if you read Buffett and all this stuff, like Buffett and Munger, these guys, Munger was still looking at businesses until he died. Because it's just more lessons, more things. And a lot of times you don't even need to take the risk to get the lesson. When Valiant, VRX, when Valiant was all the rage on Wall Street, I mean, Ackman was saying it was the next, this Ackman guy, that's my icon. I don't have a good impression for icon, but this Ackman guy, we should watch that real quick. Some people know what I'm talking about. But I think most people know what I'm talking about. But this Ackman guy bought a bunch of Valiant. He said it was the next Berkshire Hathaway. Well, Berkshire Hathaway itself did not love hearing that. I think Charlie Munger was particularly insulted. And I think that, this Ackman guy really thought Valiant was going to work out. And of course it didn't. And I think that he took the risk of buying Valiant shares, and he paid the price, unfortunate for him, of losing money. And and you didn't have to buy Valiant to see what was going to happen. Now, what's funny is they also didn't buy Tesla. They also didn't buy Microsoft. They also didn't buy Google. And Buffett actually talks about his regret not buying Google. He said they should have known. They should have known better because they were a user, he said, of the product. Now, I don't think that's a good excuse to being the user of the product. He shouldn't have been unaware of Google, even if they weren't a user of the product. But I suppose that's a reason, But I do think Buffett's fear of technology, or whatever you want to call it, has probably caused him more harm than good. But, he's obviously not crying. And I think, again, when Buffett said stuff like, we invest in businesses we understand, it's from that capital is your return engine perspective. It's a very old perspective, but it is a perspective that makes sense. And now you're hearing people talking about the death of SaaS, right? That maybe, I doubt it, but maybe a guy and a cursor and a Claude or OpenAI or whatever, that one man and an IDE can recreate the software that you need. I don't need Salesforce. I can make my own. I don't need Workday. I can make my own. And so forth. And that basically the capital part of a software company is now being laid bare. That, hold on, drug companies have super high margins. Well, they got patents. Why does Oracle have super high margins? Why does Salesforce have high margins? Why does Intuit have high margins? Why does Adobe have high margins? Why do I need any of these things? I'll just have my AI make them. And of course, we don't think that AI can do that right now, but over time, perhaps that's the case. And that's sort of the Buffett theory of, well, wait a second, why would I pay for software when I can make it myself? And, some companies do make their own software. But the question is, will all software disappear? And that capital is something that you no longer have to look at and say, well, I wish I could spend a couple $100 million on capital and get a multi-billion-dollar software company. Now the point is that, well, Kamatha said, we're going to start seeing, software companies like that coming out cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. We'll see what happens. Nobody knows what the future will hold. Maybe there'll be a brand new, kind of be a brand new way to think about business. Maybe not. This is where your theory and my theory, we'll toss it around, maybe over a glass of wine or something. We'll just figure out, well, actually the capital is in the relationships. The software itself didn't make a difference. You could sell slop. I'm not saying Oracle right out loud right now, but you could sell slop and still get huge customers.
Order cancelled.
It doesn't matter if your software is good or not, works or
Order
not.
filled. Order cancelled.
To make a difference. So, because it's all in the relationships of sales and things like that. But then does the capital become the salesperson? I don't know. Lots of good questions. I'm not saying you should listen to Kamath or something, by the way. If that's what you caught from that, I don't know what to tell you.